Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into a topic that's stirring up a lot of conversation in the autism community.
It's a big one for sure.
Yeah, so we're looking at this new study proposing we use IQ to categorize people with autism.
Interesting.
And to really break down why it's causing such a stir, we're going to be looking closely at an article by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, who critiques the study from their perspective as an autistic scholar.
Yeah, this study has sparked quite a bit of debate, and Hoerricks really takes it head on in this article. It's a really insightful piece.
Absolutely. So to kind of jump right into it, the study is proposing this framework for stratifying autism based on IQ scores.
Okay.
And they say it's all about getting more precise research outcomes and using that for better resource allocation.
I see.
But right away, Hoerricks is throwing up a red flag asking who actually benefits from this framework.
Right, it's a good question.
And it really kind of sets the stage for the whole critique. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, it's a crucial question, and Hoerricks makes a strong case that this framework could end up doing more harm than good, especially for autistic individuals. One of the most compelling points they make is that the study completely ignores the idea of Gestalt Language Processors, GLPs.
Oh, so for our listeners who may not be familiar with GLPs, could you explain what that is and why it's relevant here?
Absolutely. So GLPs are people who acquire language in a holistic way. They understand the big picture first instead of processing language analytically. And that's important because standard IQ tests are designed for analytical thinkers.
So they don't accurately assess the abilities of these GLPs.
Exactly.
So it's like using the wrong tool for the job, right? If this study's whole foundation hinges on IQ being this reliable measure, but it's not even capturing the true abilities of a whole portion of the autistic population, then can the study's conclusions even be considered valid?
You're spot on. And Hoerricks argues that it goes beyond just data accuracy. It's a prime example of what they call reductionism, where the complexities of autism are simplified down to just an IQ score, erasing the diverse experiences of autistic people.
And that's a huge problem, particularly for those in level 1 and 2 of the DSM criteria, as Hoerricks points out.
Yeah,
Their support needs might become invisible within this framework.
absolutely.
You know, someone might score within a normal IQ range, but still need help with sensory overload in certain situations.
Exactly. Those nuances are completely lost.
And to really dive into the potential harm of this system, Hoerricks uses what's called the power threat, meaning framework.
The PTMF, yes.
Can you break down the PTMF for us and how it applies here?
Of course. The PTMF basically helps us understand how systems of power can disadvantage and create distress for certain groups.
Okay.
And in this case, Hoerricks argues that this IQ-based framework could consolidate power in the hands of researchers and funders.
So it becomes about who controls the narrative and who gets left out.
Exactly. It's about whose voices are amplified and whose are silenced. And, Hoerricks even draws a parallel to the historical roots of IQ testing in eugenics, which tried to categorize and rank people based on perceived intellectual superiority.
It's a chilling thought, right? Like, are we falling back into old patterns even with good intentions?
Yeah, it raises some serious ethical questions.
Definitely. But Hoerricks takes us even further, comparing approaches to autism in China and the UK. What's the point of this comparison?
Hoerricks uses these contrasting examples to demonstrate how cultural and systemic biases can sneak into research even when researchers aren't aware of it.
So the research question itself could be biased from the start.
Exactly. And that bias then influences the entire study and its conclusions.
Interesting. So in China, the focus is heavily on correction, like autism is something to be fixed.
Right.
While in the UK, the emphasis is on the burden of autism on resources.
Particularly within their healthcare system.
So even with these completely different cultural approaches, both end up pushing autistic voices to the margins.
Just true.
It really shows how important context is and how careful we need to be about the assumptions we bring when studying autism.
It highlights the need for a much more nuanced and culturally sensitive approach to this research.
For sure. But Hoerricks doesn't leave us in a place of despair. They offer some hope by pointing to alternative ways forward.
A different path.
Wow.
They remind us there's a better way forward, and it starts with moving away from IQ scores and towards the real lived experiences of autistic people.
Recognizing that autism isn't defined by a single number.
Exactly.
It's about understanding the unique ways that autistic individuals actually experience and interact with the world.
Precisely. Hoerricks wants us to really rethink what it even means to be autistic. They emphasize it's not just about deficits or burdens. It's about a complex mix of sensory, communicative, and relational differences that really shape how people experience the world.
So those differences actually define autistic identity.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing those differences and understanding they're not inherently bad.
Right.
By focusing on those lived experiences, we can build a framework that reflects the real needs and hopes of the autistic community, one that goes beyond just categorizing and labeling.
So if this model based on IQ is so flawed, what are the alternatives? What kind of research would actually help the autistic community?
That's a question Hoerricks really grapples with in the article.
Yeah.
And they admit there's no single solution. But they do offer some interesting avenues for future research. One key idea is community-based participatory research.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, it's where autistic people aren't just subjects being studied. They're partners in shaping the research itself.
Okay.
They're involved in every single step,
Yeah.
from deciding the research questions to gathering data to analyzing it and even figuring out how to use the results.
So giving autistic people a real voice in how research is done.
And a say in how it impacts their lives.
Exactly.
It's recognizing that the autistic community has its own unique expertise based on lived experiences.
Right. They're the ones living in a world that often wasn't designed for them.
Right.
So their insights are so valuable.
Absolutely. And this makes me think about how often people try to speak for the autistic community instead of actually listening to them. This shift to community-based research seems like a good way to address that.
Definitely. It's about moving away from that traditional expert-subject relationship and creating something much more collaborative and inclusive.
Exactly. Hoerricks also stresses that research needs to go beyond just identifying and categorizing. It should focus on understanding the supports that can really help autistic people thrive.
It's not enough to just diagnose, right? We need to actually improve people's lives.
Exactly. And that means researching things like sensory-friendly spaces, communication strategies, and job support programs, things that make a difference in everyday life.
So focusing on practical solutions.
Yes, making sure it translates to real support for people. And those supports shouldn't be about fixing or changing autistic people.
Right.
It's about recognizing their strengths and helping them reach their full potential.
I love that framing. It's about empowerment, not remediation.
Right.
Creating a world where autistic people can be themselves and thrive.
Exactly. And Hoerricks argues that empowerment goes hand in hand with self-advocacy. They end the article with a call to action, encouraging people to share their experiences, their thoughts, and their critiques to really make their voices heard.
So this isn't just an abstract debate happening in some academic bubble.
No.
This is about real people's lives, their identities, their futures.
Absolutely.
It's about pushing back against these harmful narratives and demanding research that truly serves the autistic community. So what would you say to someone listening who's thinking, this is important, but what can I actually do?
There's so many ways to get involved. But the first thing is to seek out the voices of autistic people. Listen to their stories, their experiences, and their perspectives.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many autistic authors, bloggers, activists, and organizations sharing their knowledge and advocating for change.
It's a great reminder.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the academic side of things, but this is ultimately about people.
Exactly. And those people are the experts on their own lives. By listening to them, learning from them, and amplifying their voices, we can start to change the narrative and create a more inclusive and supportive world for everyone in the community.
It's amazing how much we've covered. We started with this very specific issue of IQ and autism, and now we're talking about representation, empowerment, and the importance of personal experience.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It speaks to how deeply Hoerricks thinks about these things.
Right.
They've brought together complex ideas, personal reflections, and historical context in such an insightful and moving way.
Absolutely. And I know our listeners are feeling the same way. But before we wrap up, there's one final question I think we need to explore.
Yeah, it's a crucial one.
If we're really serious about moving beyond these limited frameworks, what other models are out there that offer a more complete and inclusive way of understanding and supporting autistic people?
What new paths can we take?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it? Where do we go from here? Hoerricks really pointed out the problems with this IQ-based framework, but they also touch on some alternatives that are getting attention. What are some of the paths forward?
Well, one really promising model that Hoerricks mentions is the neurodiversity paradigm, and this framework really changes how we think about autism. It moves away from the idea that autism is something that needs to be fixed.
So we're not seeing it as a deficit, but as just a natural variation in how the brain works.
Exactly. The neurodiversity paradigm actually celebrates the strengths and unique perspectives that autistic people bring to the table. It recognizes there's no one right way to think or learn or interact with the world.
It's like saying different doesn't mean less than.
Right.
It's about valuing the diversity of how our brains work and seeing autism as a part of that.
Precisely. And this change in thinking really impacts how we approach support. Instead of forcing autistic people to fit into neurotypical standards, the goal becomes creating environments and systems that work for them and let them thrive as themselves.
So the environment adapts to the person, not the other way around.
Yes, meeting people where they are and giving them the tools and support they need to succeed. So, for example, if someone is really sensitive to noise, instead of trying to make them less sensitive, we could give them noise-canceling headphones or create quiet spaces where they can relax.
It sounds so simple, but it's such a powerful shift, isn't it?
It is.
Recognizing and respecting those differences, not trying to erase them.
Exactly. And this applies to all parts of life, from education and jobs to social interactions and community involvement.
So how do we actually put this into practice? How do we make this neurodiversity paradigm a reality?
Well, it starts with education and awareness.
Yeah.
We need to challenge those old assumptions and stereotypes about autism. We need to educate ourselves, our families, our communities, and our institutions about what neurodiversity really means and why it's important.
It's about changing the story, right? Making sure people understand that autism isn't one thing.
Yeah,
It's a spectrum, and everyone on that spectrum is different.
exactly. And it's not just about understanding those differences. It's about appreciating and celebrating them.
That's a key point.
Yeah,
Moving away from fear and judgment and embracing the richness and diversity that autistic people bring to the world.
absolutely. And that celebration needs to be everywhere. We need inclusive schools, workplaces, healthcare systems, and communities where autistic individuals feel supported, valued, and empowered to be themselves.
Building a world where everyone can thrive no matter how their brain works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, this isn't just about autistic individuals. Embracing neurodiversity benefits all of us.
Right. It creates a better society for everyone.
A more just equitable and compassionate world.
Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive. We started with a critique of this IQ-based framework and ended up exploring these incredible possibilities of the neurodiversity paradigm.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And it's a reminder that what we know about autism is always changing. We need to stay informed, keep thinking critically, and most importantly, listen to autistic people.
Their voices are the most important.
Because in the end, this is about people, their lives, their experiences, and their futures. So as you go about your day, think about what we talked about today. How can you challenge those old ideas of normal? How can you make space for autistic people in your life?
Even small things can make a difference.
Yeah.
Educate yourself, challenge stereotypes, speak up when you see injustice, and support organizations that are fighting for a more neurodiversity-friendly world.
That's a fantastic call to action. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into such a fascinating and important topic. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.